Well, if they won't believe us, we'll just have to go and solve this crime ourselves, won't we?
Hello, my name's Gavin, this is Genre Books, and this is my final video in the Marple cinematic universe, inspired by March mystery madness and my love for a stupid pun. I have decided to rectify a long-standing gap in my reading. I had not read Agatha Christie, so I have now read some Agatha Christie, half a dozen Miss Marple novels, and have seen 10 different portrayals of Miss Marple in the last month. This is the final head-to-head, and I start with noting a mistake I made right at the end of last week's video. I said this was a match of two dames of the British Empire. That is incorrect. Margaret Rutherford was a dame. Joan Hickson, I was sure she was Dame Joan Hickson. She's not, but she did have an OBE, and she was given the OBE by Queen Elizabeth II, mostly on the strength of her portrayal of Miss Marple, which is a show that Her late Majesty apparently enjoyed immensely. I think I have saved the best matchup until last. Both of these actresses are synonymous with their portrayal of Miss Marple, and their portrayals are, however, radically different. Dame Margaret Rutherford, following a traumatic childhood, found occupation as a piano teacher and an elocution teacher. She had had some theatrical training, but she was a relative latecomer to acting, making her stage debut at the Old Vic in 1925 at the age of 33. But she did attract attention of the right people, and in 1941 Noel Coward, who had seen her in theatre, had her in mind for the role of Madame Arcati in his new play Blithe Spirit. She became very famous for the role, and when the film version of the play arrived some 4 or 5 years later, directed by David Lean, she was the natural choice and made that breakthrough in cinema. She had been in films before, but in minor roles. And she had found her niche in comedy. She continued to get parts in British productions such as Mouse on the Moon, Passport to Pimlico, The Happiest Days of Your Life, The Importance of Being Earnest, and The Smallest Show on Earth. In 1963, she won an Oscar, making her the second of the Miss Marples I've looked at to have won an Oscar after Helen Hayes, and this was for her role in The VIPs. At the time, she was the oldest woman to have won an Oscar, and she was also the last woman born in the 19th century to win one. By the time of her Oscar win, she had already starred in the film that I've watched for this little project, Murder, She Said. This is the first cinematic or screen portrayal of Miss Marple. It's the first of 4 outings that Margaret Rutherford had as Miss Marple, possibly 5. She had an uncredited cameo in a Poirot film sometime later.
I cannot see why they're having such difficulty. The whole thing is very clear, Mr. Stringer.
I quite agree, Miss Marple.
The solution is ABC to anyone with half a brain cell.
Murder, She Said, as well as presumably being the inspiration for the series Murder, She Wrote, is a loose adaptation of Agatha Christie's The 450 from Paddington. In the United States, this book is published under the title What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw. The film goes with neither of these titles and has something altogether more snappy. This is apparently because people might be confused by the 4:50 from Paddington. Essentially, that is just a train leaving at 10 to 5 from Paddington Station in London. Paddington here is the station, not the bear. But they couldn't really call the film What Mrs. McGillicuddy Saw because there is no Mrs. McGillicuddy. This is a little bit of a shame because in the book she is a great character and a cheerleader for Miss Marple, but the absence is understandable. It allows the filmmakers to simply substitute Miss Marple for Mrs. McGillicuddy, which put Miss Marple into the film quite a lot earlier.
Now you saw that, didn't you? Didn't you? Do you think anyone will believe us?
This speeds up the whole process enormously, and it further accelerates when the character of Lucy Islesbarrow is also rolled into the Miss Marple character. Lucy Islesbarrow does appear as a character in the film, but as a very small part as the Miss Marple's housemaid. What this does is it allows Miss Marple to be on the scene for the rest of the film. Again, deftly done by the filmmakers. Also exploits the comic potential which Rutherford delivers in spades. And speaking of screen time, Joan Hickson is a bit cheeky here because she actually turns up as another servant in the house. So putting herself into the Marple franchise pretty early, even as another character. The rest of the cast are good as well, for the most part. The role of the young boy is dubbed for some reason, which was jarring to my ears, but you get past that. What you also have is a cameo from a very young Richard Briers and a lovely part where James Robertson Justice plays a very James Robertson Justice role and has great chemistry with Rutherford. Rutherford brings an infectious energy to the role. It is something so radically different from how Agatha Christie wrote the character, but Rutherford actually takes this and just makes it her own. So much so, in fact, that not only did she bring her own clothing to the production, don't worry dears, I'll bring it all and wear my own clothes, but it stretched to making sure that her husband had a part in the movie. Her husband appears with Rutherford in a number of her films, and a brand new part of The Librarian is written directly for him. Her performance is great, and it makes what is occasionally quite a silly film immensely watchable. A lot of the plot points and characterization is cut out, but what they have left in is just the essential parts. Lots of the family do not get the time on screen that they do on the page, but this is just a result of trying to fit everything into a film which only has a running time of 85 minutes. Agatha Christie, I think, fair to say, wasn't a fan initially of Rutherford's portrayal of Miss Marple, but I think the success of the film, and it was an incongruously successful film in the States, led to enough of a sales bump for Christie to perhaps ameliorate her position, or in fact change her mind. And one of the later Miss Marple books has a dedication to Dame Margaret Rutherford. 20 years after her appearance in Murder, She Said, Joan Hickson returns with a promotion to the title role of Miss Marple. The BBC approached this as just a period drama, and from 1984 to 1992 made sure that all 12 of the novels were dramatised. Joan Hickson absolutely fits the part, and she's age appropriate as well. She is in her 80s. She also has something that none of the other actors who have portrayed Marple have had, and that is Agatha Christie's blessing. Joan Hickson, back in 1946, had been in a stage adaptation of Appointment with Death from Agatha Christie. Christie saw the production, enjoyed it, the play was a big hit, and wrote to Hickson afterwards saying how much she had enjoyed her in the play, and I hope one day you will play my dear Miss Marple. Well, 40 years later, her wish was granted, and in late 84, the Miss Marple BBC series began. The episodes that I watched, 3 episodes in all, were the dramatisation of A Murder is Announced, and I think with possibly a little bit of rivalry from surprisingly, the anime, this is the most faithful to the original literature of all the productions that I've seen. And as well as Hickson's casting, I think the rest of the casting is pretty much spot on. It is nice to see Joan Sims in a more dramatic role than the comedy parts she is famous for. She's from the Carry On franchise and once was also in Doctor Who. We have a very young pre-Moneypenny Samantha Bond, and we have Sylvia Sims, even though unfortunately her role here is a small one. We also have Kevin Whately. Surprisingly, I wasn't expecting to see him, and he's here getting some practice as a amanuensis to a detective, this time following Inspector Craddock around in preparation for his time following Inspector Morse. The production is great. The version that I saw on YouTube really doesn't do it justice. It looks the part. They're quite good when they put their mind to it, the BBC, at a period drama, and this looks, I think, like post-war Britain would do. The village looks absolute chocolate box bucolic perfection. A quick science fiction aside here. When I saw the credits going up, the production designer was Raymond Cusick. Raymond Cusick, possibly most famous in his career for designing the Daleks. Maybe it is the getting of that role of a lifetime. Maybe it is getting that role at a late stage in your career. Maybe it's getting that role on a production that is taking it seriously and with a high degree of fidelity to the original text and authenticity in its production. But it is Hickson still who very quietly steals the show. It's her portrayal of Marple with that placid inquisitiveness, that precision of speech, the underlying wit and occasional waspishness that she brings to the screen, which I just really like.
I couldn't believe it. And when I exited from the train and people started cheering, and then after the photographs walking through, and it was like a strange dream, really. I mean, I was told there were nearly 3,000 people there.
None of the choices I've made in any of these Marple Cinematic Universe episodes has been easy, but I think Hickson is the winner here for me this week. I loved both portrayals, but they are just two portrayals of the same character which are radically different. I think Rutherford needs a special mention and laurels for being that first depiction of Marple, putting Marple on the cinema map of non-readers and bringing her own character and energy to the role. It's a bold, rambunctious, barnstorming portrayal. But Hickson is just so much closer to the character as it appears on the page. Even though she's hardly in the first episode, that is still a function of fidelity to the text, because in the book Miss Marple doesn't really show up until sort of page 75, 78, something like that. This was, I think, the most difficult choice out of all of them, but in another way it was quite an easy one. It's Joan Hickson this week. And that wraps up the Marple Cinematic Universe until someone else makes a Miss Marple adaptation, and I'm sure it can't be long. In the first video I matched up Inga Langen in the former West Germany with Ita Eva in the Baltic States in the former USSR, and Ita Eva just pipped that one. We had the star-studded Hollywood portrayals in The Mirror Cracked with Angela Lansbury as Marple versus the lower budget but really fun Helen Hayes vehicle in A Caribbean Mystery, and Helen Hayes, I think, edged it that week. With the ITV matchup of McEwen and Mackenzie, it was difficult because this is just a straight choice between the portrayals of the two actresses, because it's the same production. None of these choices have been easy, but McEwen, I think, just got it that week. Kim Young-jin edged past Karo Yakigusa as my search travelled east last week with two radically original takes on the Miss Marple character. One a bit more authentic to the page, but appearing in animated form, and Kim Young-jin in a very different, looser, shall we say, interpretation of Ms. Ma. But even the interpretations I chose in each of those weeks, Ita Eva, Kim Young-jin, Helen Hayes, Geraldine McEwen, they can't better the portrayal by Joan Hickson. In fairness, a lot of people told me as I was going through this, Joan Hickson is absolutely the one. And I see it now. I had not watched them before. I knew Joan Hickson was Miss Marple. I just never watched a show when it was being aired. I think it started when I was 8, ended when I was 16. It's probably just not something I was interested in watching. And as I said, I did all this in the beginning because I had a massive gap in my reading. I had not 4 months ago read a Christie novel. I've now read half a dozen and I've seen all of these portrayals. I'm hopefully on a little bit of safer ground talking about Agatha Christie in the future. And I leave this series in a happy position of still having 5 Agatha Christie books to read and a whole bunch of shows to finish watching. And I haven't even started on Tommy and Tuppence, or Poirot. But until next time, bye.
Young man, I was not dreaming. I saw it. Ask them. They saw it happen. What did I tell you? Nobody is going to believe us.